Hey Stitch,
I'm
can you
not
do it?
Stitch.
Can you do a Deadpool impression?
No, this is my real voice.
No, it's not.
7 cozy campfires.
I promise.
Holy.
No, Brett, if that's your real voice, then that's like, that's awesome. That's awesome if that's your real voice. But if that's like, that's definitely not your real voice. Because it's like too much of a low but high pitch. Like that makes no sense. And you sound like the guy from Lilo and Stitch. Like I swear. Chat, what the frick is going on?
Fortnite memes right now.
I'm having childhood memories right now.
I wanted to do this because this has never been on my channel before. And I thought you guys might enjoy it. Well, I gotta go in the circle. See. A 20-second kill game. Yep, I know where you were.
I feel like he's using a voice changer.
Why?
What the heck? Like, either that or this kid has not hit puberty. If he's an adult and I have a higher pitch voice than him, that's kind of weird. And I have a, wait, no, if I have a lower pitch voice than him, that's kind of weird. Okay. Chat, please tell me this guy's literally trolling, because this is so, like, he sounds...
What do you mean?
What the frick? No, I know he's trolling because he sounds like a girl. Sounds like a girl now. That's how I know he's trolling, bruh. Like, come on, bruh. Where are you going? You're going out the circle.
I'm sorry, sir. I think you're mistaken.
Bro, stop.
Oh, he's dropped it on top of me.
Stop. Please.
No. No.
Stop.
No.
Like, come on.
$28 kills. GG. Oh my god. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. Hold on 1 second, guys.
I can't. He keeps on changing his voice, bruh. So weird.
What the fuck?
Like at first he sounded like Lilo and Stitch, and now he sounds like a girl, bruh. This man is trolling me. Bruh, why are you going out of circle? Go back in circle.
can't fight him.
Finally, you actually use your real voice. Dang. Well, I cannot get you. Why were you using these different impressions or something?
It's fun.
Hey, can you do a Deadpool impression?
Nope.
Man.
Those people came and killed me.
I know.
And then they got killed.
Oh, well.
I didn't even know they put grenade launchers back in the game.
They didn't. They were spamming grenades. They were spamming
That
grenades.
might have been it too. Yeah.
Hey, you wanna know what gave it away? The reason why I knew you were trolling and doing a voice impression?
Because I kept changing the voices.
Yeah, you changed it like 3 times. Reason why. Maybe next time.
I mean, if I had wanted to not make it obvious, I could. That's no fun.
Yeah, whatever you say. Yeah, in front of me? I can't see it. Oh. Crap. I'm out of here. How can he still see me? Oh, come on! I'm getting attacked by 2 different duos! Why are they still focusing me, but there's kids in front of them? Oh my god! So dumb! Stop focused!
Hello. Welcome back. I'm back, and I'm going to be playing some music.
This game sucks. I got focused by freaking 2 teams.
No one likes to watch this shit. Really?
In 2013, scientists discovered a very unusual find in the Spanish cave of Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of the Bones. What they found were human remains. What was so unusual about this was primarily its location. After all, the cave is located at a depth of 43 feet, or 13 meters. It's too deep to be inhabited by humans. There were also no signs that the cave was used as a burial place. After some time, it became clear this find was evidence in human history. At least the first case known to science to date. What guided the first murderer on Earth, and what made the circumstances of this crime unusually strange? At the dawn of scientific research, there were two opposing points of view on the nature of man. On the one hand was Thomas Hobbes, who suggested that the nature of Homo sapiens is extremely violent, and the entire evolutionary development of mankind is a war of all against all. On the other hand, there was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed that human civilization was built on cooperation and the desire to be a full member of a social group. The debate between these two sides exists to this day. Who is really right, Hobbes or Rousseau?
What do you want?
Is the real nature of man?
What do you want?
To clarify the case of the corpses discovered in the Spanish cave, scientists decided to study the remains in closer detail. They assembled a skull from 52 fragments scattered along the bottom of the cave, then determined his age. It turned out that the person the skull belonged to lived approximately 430,000 years ago. However, this was not what surprised scientists. Most of the researchers' attention was focused on two fractures above the left eye. They had the same outline and were completely identical. At first, scientists suggested that the injuries occurred when falling to the bottom of the cave. However, in Cima de los Huesos, there is nothing that could cause such a symmetrical fracture. In addition, no signs of healing were found in the injured area. This means that the injury either caused death or happened posthumously. Scientists began to study the skull fractures in more detail and came to the conclusion that they resulted from a blow from a stone spear or axe.
What do you want?
That is, it was an intentional murder. Judging by the location of the fracture, the attacker struck the area above the left eye with his right hand several times. After that, the killer dragged the lifeless body and dropped it to the bottom of the cave of Cima de los Huesos. However, the murdered man seemed to have been far from the only victim of severe physical violence, because besides him, the remains of another 28 people were found in the cave. No traces of violent death were found on the other skeletons, but scientists are sure that the people were already dead when they were dropped to the bottom of the cave. It's possible that there were several criminals who committed the first ever massacre known to mankind. Or maybe it was some serial maniac. It's noteworthy that such a crime occurred at least 130,000 years before the appearance of the first Homo sapiens. The killer, like his victims, belonged to the early species of humans. It could be assumed that only the distant predecessors of Homo sapiens were brutal killers, and the intelligent man is a more peaceful creature, but this is far from the truth. The first Homo sapiens only continued down the path of violence that their ancestors had initiated. Another discovery only confirms this. During the Second World War, human remains were discovered in the Romanian cave of Sioclovina, among which was also a skull with unusual injuries. These remains were dated to about 33,000 years ago. For a long time, scientists couldn't explain the wounds found, and only 70 years later, with the advent of modern, high-quality equipment, were the researchers able to solve this crime. Scientists created several molds of the head from a material that mimics the properties of real bones. Then, the experimenters threw it from different heights and also tested various murder weapons, such as a baseball bat and fragments of volcanic stones on the model. The head was hit in two positions. When it rested on a hard surface, in case the victim was lying on the ground at the time of the murder. Then also in an upright position, in case the victim was standing during the attack. After a series of simulated attacks on the artificial head, scientists compared the data with CT scans of the actual skull. As in the case of the previously suspected killing, there were no signs of healing on the skull. Therefore, the blow most likely caused death. The hypothesis that injuries were caused after death was ruled out. Indeed, otherwise, the bones would be old and dry at the time of impact, so the fracture would have sharp edges. However, bone fragments flowed very smoothly inside, which indicates that at the time of the blow, there was soft brain tissue inside the skull. That is, the person was still alive at the time of injury. But the victim and the blows themselves were few. The first blow happened when the person fell face down, probably after being pushed. After that, the victim rose back to his feet. The second injury was then received directly from the attacker. The blow was delivered with a blunt object, after which the bone fragments flew off to the back of the skull. This indicates that the killer was face to face with the victim. Since the blows were on the right side of the head, scientists suggested that the attacker was left. This case was one of the first killings known to scientists to have occurred among Homo sapiens. In modern times, we often tend to blame violence on the media, computer games, or violent films. However, the killers I just described didn't play Fallout or watch the bloody comedies of Quentin Tarantino. In fact, the root of the problem lies much deeper. Evolutionary biologists believe that the cause of modern violence is natural selection. Our ancestors, who had a propensity towards cruelty, simply killed all their peace-loving kindred. Therefore, only violent people could continue to rule the clan. As a result, the genes responsible for aggression were preserved in the evolutionary development of man, passed on to subsequent generations, and finally reached us. But despite the fact that every person has a tendency towards aggressive behavior, only some of us are capable of real atrocities. The fact is that in addition to aggression, evolution has also endowed us with empathy and sympathy. Since our survival has always depended to a large extent on interaction with other people, the ability to empathize and collaborate allowed for coexistence with our own kind. However, some are simply devoid of this quality. In psychiatry, such people are called sociopaths and psychopaths. Due to a lack of emotions, such members of the human race seek the thrill of destroying their own kind or hurting others. Whether this antisocial personality disorder is innate or is a consequence of the influence of upbringing and the surrounding social environment remains an open question. However, to commit a murder, it's not necessary to be a psychopath. It's enough just to have a very close emotional connection with your potential victim. The U.S. Bureau of Statistics data confirms this. According to statistics, about 30% of all female murder victims suffered their fate at the hands of their own spouses. Another 18.3% of women are killed by former spouses. Only 8.7% of murdered women are victims of strangers. This is because in emotionally charged situations, people often act impulsively and irrationally, which can lead to shocking and irreversible consequences. Answering the question that I asked at the beginning regarding human nature, we can say with confidence that both statements are true. Human nature can be both destructive and creative. Aggression has helped the human race to survive in the adverse conditions of the primitive world and become the dominant species on the planet. At the same time, this ability to collaborate and empathize with others has helped us create oral and written speech, science, art, and culture. And most importantly, we managed to curb our own animal instincts at least a little. Despite the fact that acts of violence still occur, for most modern people, killing is something completely wrong and unacceptable. This gives us hope that over time, violence will become just an unnecessary relic of the past. What do you think the motive of the primeval killings from this video was? Write your guess in the comments.
Back in the day, if you wanted to become a public enemy #1, you really had to work for the title, and the man we're going to talk about today definitely put in the effort to earn it. He started small and ended his career with a series of crimes that would go down in American history. In the 1930s, stories pervaded the U.S. public landscape about this expert machine gunner and his crime sprees. The authorities were always one step behind as Machine Gun Kelly robbed banks across the country, from Texas to Mississippi to Washington to Iowa. But these robberies would pale in comparison to his last brazen misadventure. Let's now see how this all unfurled. He was born on July 18, 1895 in Memphis, Tennessee, and given the name George Kelly Barnes. What we know about his childhood is that unlike many other master criminals of the time, he wasn't born destitute, and his family were said to be fairly wealthy, and his upbringing traditional. Little else is known about his early life, but we know that he got into Mississippi State University and took a course in agriculture in 1917. He wasn't a good student, however, with his best grade being a C+, and that was only for good physical hygiene. He was a troublesome student and rarely on the good side of the university staff. Studying Neva Ramsey, he decided enough was enough and quit his education. The two got married very quickly and had 2 sons. Now, the prodigal son had to fend for himself, and for his new family, which wasn't easy. First, he took a job as a cab driver in Memphis, but this wasn't paying the bills. He was just 19, and things weren't easy, so he looked for other avenues to make some quick cash. It seems his wife wasn't very happy about living hand to mouth, and she divorced him, leaving young Kelly broke and heartbroken. So, what do you do when you're stone broke, down on your luck, and you live in the Prohibition era? Well, one option is becoming a gangster, and that's exactly what George decided to do. He became a bootlegger, a purveyor of illegal alcohol. This didn't go unnoticed by the Memphis police, and soon George had made a name for himself. This was, of course, not good for a man whose family were notable wealthy folk, so he decided to change his name to George R. Kelly. He then headed out west to seek fortune, which would soon turn into infamy. On his journey, he managed to evade arrest and gain a reputation in the underworld, and it wasn't until 1928 when the law finally got the better of him. That year, the cops arrested Kelly for smuggling alcohol into an Indian reservation, and he was sentenced to 3 years at Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas. After doing his time, and we should say as a model prisoner, George got out and quickly met a woman who, you could say, helped create the legend. Her name was Catherine Thorne. Before that, she had gone by Cleo Mae Brooks, and eventually she'd become Mrs. Kelly. We should say something about this woman, because she's an integral part of the Machine Gun Kelly story. She already had a colorful history of her own before she met George, including having already been married 3 times. Her last husband wound up shot dead with a suicide note left next to him. Nothing too out of the ordinary. The problem was, he was illiterate. It's why they believe Catherine had murdered him, but she was never convicted of the crime. One of the investigators was sure she'd done it, and she had even been overheard prior to his death, saying that she wanted him dead. She was certainly working outside the law when she met George, and as you'll see, she just got worse. When she met Kelly, she was the mistress of another criminal, a small-time bootlegger named Steve Anderson. After her dalliance with Kelly, the two soon became inseparable, and in 1930, they were married in Minneapolis. Here's where the tale of a garden variety crook turns into the stuff of legends. As the story goes, Catherine decided to go out and buy a gift for her new husband. That present turned out to be a Thompson submachine gun. She told her lover to go out into the open and practice with it and become an expert at using it. He dutifully did what he was told, and once he could use the gun, Kelly soon began his crime spree of robbing banks with his trusty weapon. Let's remember that before this, Kelly was what you might call an up-and-coming criminal, but with his wife's help, he soon gained a fierce reputation as a notorious machine gun-wielding robber. She wanted her husband to have this great reputation, and it said in her bid to market him, she even went around local underground drinking clubs where gangsters frequented, handing out spent cartridges, telling people, here's a souvenir from the man known as Machine Gun Kelly. He robbed quite a few banks, but it wasn't until 1933 that his name became known across all of America, while the FBI made him public enemy #1 and put out wanted posters for him that described him as an expert machine gunner. It was that same year that the husband and wife team, along with an associate, hatched the biggest crime yet. The plan was to kidnap a wealthy oil tycoon from Oklahoma City named Charles Frederick Urschel. Here's how it went down. It's July 22nd, 1933, and Urschel is playing bridge at his luxury residence with his friends. Their wives are there too. Kelly storms into the party, his machine gun in hand, and at his side, his accomplice, Albert L. Bates. Another seasoned criminal. This was no ordinary stick-up, and the men now looking down the barrel of America's most famous gun are told that they're leaving the game, otherwise someone's head is going to be blown off. They take Urschel and his friend Walter R. Jarrett from the house and force them into a car outside. At this point, the kidnappers don't even know which man is Urschel. They drove as fast as possible out past city limits where they were far away from people, and the two men were told to get out their wallets. While Jarrett was also in the oil business and quite wealthy himself, Kelly only wanted Urschel, so Jarrett was let go unharmed. But not before taking the $51 out of his wallet. They drove to a farmhouse in Paradise, Texas, where they kept Urschel hostage. The two men put out the word that if Urschel was to ever be seen again alive, a ransom had to be paid of $200,000. That was a lot of money at the time, the equivalent of around $4 million today. The FBI has since published the ransom letter. In part, it went like this. You will pack $200,000 and use genuine Federal Reserve notes of $20 denomination in a suitable, light-colored leather bag. There's also a threat, of course, which reads, remember this, if any trickery is attempted, you will find the remains of Urschel, and instead of joy, there will be double grief. For someone very near and dear to the Urschel family is under constant surveillance, and will likewise suffer for your error. Believe it or not, the Urschel family decided to pay the money, and 8 days after the patriarch was kidnapped, the cash was dropped off in $20 bills at LaSalle Hotel in Kansas City. The next day, the gangsters made good on their word and let Urschel go at a place called Norman in Oklahoma. There, the wealthy businessman nonchalantly walked into a restaurant and called for a cab. He was pretty unfazed by the ordeal, and for good reason. You see, Urschel didn't make all of that money by being stupid, and during his kidnapping, he was staying vigilant and collecting information on his assailants. At no time could he see through his blindfold, but all the time he was listening to the sounds around him. He knew, for instance, when an airplane passed overhead each day, and this would prove valuable. He made sure to leave his fingerprints everywhere, and when possible, he cataloged how many steps it took him to get somewhere. He knew how long he traveled in a car and when it stopped for gas. All this was so he could give some description to the FBI as to where he might have been kept. It was a huge case too, and J. Edgar Hoover put his best men on. With the help of Urschel and his formidable memory, the FBI soon had a list of possible places where Urschel might have been kept. They soon descended on the Paradise farmhouse and found that people were there, but not who they were expecting. The FBI discovered Robert and Laura Shannon and Harvey Bailey, who had been using the farmhouse as a safe house of their own after committing a robbery. They also had some cash from the kidnapping, around $700 according to the FBI. Of course, Kelly hadn't just waited around once he had the cash. He and his wife started hopping from state to state in an attempt to throw off law enforcement. The group at the farmhouse were arrested, and more arrests would follow, because kidnapping, staying hidden, and getting rid of vast amounts of money takes a lot of people.
Let's play Raid Shadow Legends. Start now for free.
Car 34, no activity. I used to be a detective. Now I'm on patrol. I'm trying to work my way back up. People. Several arrests were made, including people charged with money changing. The hunt was now on for the masterminds of the kidnapping, and the Kellys weren't too happy about what was going on. As others were arrested, they sent letters to the Urschel family, as well as attorneys and judges warning that they were coming to get him. In August, Kelly's accomplice from the kidnapping, Bates, was arrested in Denver, Colorado, with $660 and a machine gun on him. At around this time, the FBI was discovering the stolen bills all over the USA and was making various arrests, but the Kellys were still nowhere to be seen. But you can only run for so long. In the early hours of September 26, 1933, after receiving a tip, a residence in Memphis was raided where the fugitive couple were finally found. The great Machine Gun Kelly was without his gun. And as the legend goes, he shouted to the agents, "Don't shoot, G-men! Don't shoot, G-men!" Apparently, he had a terrible hangover after a big night, and he was caught while still in his pajamas. Nightgown Kelly just doesn't have the same ring to it. The couple was taken to Oklahoma City, and on October 12, 1933, George and Catherine Kelly were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. In all, 21 people were convicted for crimes related to the case. This included 6 life sentences and other sentences, making up in total 58 years, 2 months, and 3 days. Kelly was taken to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas, and his wife was taken to a federal prison in Cincinnati. In prison, Kelly often bragged that he'd escape, and the authorities didn't take this lightly. In 1934, he was transferred to a new prison, a place no one could break out of. Soon, Kelly would get a new nickname, Inmate Number 117, at his new home, Alcatraz. Behind bars, Kelly was actually said to be a model inmate, taking jobs and keeping his head down. He apparently felt remorse for his crimes and on several occasions wrote to the Urschels. That didn't help him though, and he would remain in prison for the rest of his life. In 1951, he was transferred back to Leavenworth and died 3 years later on his birthday from a heart attack. Catherine managed to finish her sentence and was released in 1958. After years behind bars, she didn't return to a life of crime and got a job as a bookkeeper at a nursing home and hospital in Oklahoma. The widow of Machine Gun Kelly died in 1985 at the age of 81. What do you think about the story of Machine Gun Kelly? Is his life of crime worthy of the fame his name has carried throughout the years? How many people have you killed? An interviewer asks the prisoner known as the Iceman, a one-time altar boy, a family guy, and prolific hitman. An approximate guess? He pauses, then says, more than 100. His face shows no remorse, no sign of emotion, other than perhaps a veiled bitterness aimed at life itself. How do you feel about killing? Asks the interviewer. I don't. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't have a feeling one way or the other. He'd be asked the same question in another interview, and that time he'd reply, nothing haunts me. No murders haunt me. This is the story of Richard Kuklinski, a man associated with frozen water not only for the total lack of feeling or fear that he was known for, but also for the way in which he disposed of many people whose last sight on planet Earth was the Iceman's 6'5", 300-pound body bearing down on them. How did an altar boy turn into America's hitman with the biggest body count? How does so impassive to murder or other people's pain? Richard Leonard Kuklinski was born on April 11, 1935. Many years before, he became known to some mobsters as the Devil himself. Kuklinski shared a New Jersey apartment with his Polish-American father and a mother who was born to Irish immigrants. It's a story we all know, the tough neighborhood, the hard-knock life, with his mother eking out her days in a meatpacking factory and his father working on the railroad. From interviews with Kuklinski, an inference we can make by looking at his dysfunctional family, these parents were a long way from the type that would have picked up good parenting guides. It's said the father was a hostile drunk and someone who took sadistic pleasure in beating Kuklinski and his siblings. The mother, who he called an overly strict, God-fearing woman, was no better. In fact, he once called her cancer, saying she destroyed everything she came into touch with. He'd just come in and give you a whooping because he felt like it, Kuklinski said in an interview when talking about his dad. These weren't ordinary beatings, even in a time when a smack on the backside was seen as fair play for parents. No, this maniac of a man was said to have broken household objects while beating his kids. The attacks were so vicious that this resulted in one of Kuklinski's brothers being beaten to death. The parents told the cops he had fallen down the stairs. Shortly after that, the tormented father left the family and never returned. There's no doubt such a childhood had a profound effect on what happened later, with the Iceman's brother, Joseph, also living a dissolute life that ended with sadism and tragedy. It's a familiar tale in the circles of forensic psychology. The abused children, when no hand is held out to them, turn to hurting and killing themselves. We might also ask if a violent gene is passed on. Perhaps those frontal lobes don't work as other people's work. Perhaps there's no self-control, nurture, nature, or a bit of both. But we'll let you decide later. If you've watched the movie The Iceman, brilliantly played by Michael Shannon in the starring role, you might know a few things about our guy. Like most renditions of reality, it stretches the truth, but it also skirts close at times. Growing up with his mentally impoverished mother, Kuklinski was bullied. He was one of those kids that virtually smelled of victimhood. But he was a big person, and it wouldn't be long until the Iceman-to-be realized that with enough willpower, you can break people, and when broken, they don't bother you again. If you hurt somebody, they'll leave you alone, he told an interviewer once, relating to the time in his teenage years when he made those bullies disappear once and for all. I heard it was better to give than to receive, he said, a wicked play on a cliche relating to altruism, not revenge. One time, 6 boys had been beating him. He took the beat, but then went home and found an iron bar. He returned to the group and viciously attacked them. They left him alone. He was right about that. In fact, most people would stay out of his way from then on. If you got in his way, you were going to get hurt. He told the interviewer that even a tiny infraction, someone made you look at him the wrong way, and he would beat them mercilessly. Here's the making of a hitman, a nascent killer who would do things most people could never imagine. He was also a pool shark, and it was said that if you bothered him, it would end in tears, blood, or the grave. He murdered at least one person he had called a bully. Speaking of that first murder when he was in his early teens, Kuklinski said in an interview, "I didn't mean to do it. I felt sadness. But after a while, I felt something different, some sort of rush. If enemies or perceived enemies weren't around to hurt, it said as a teen he'd take his anger out on the neighborhood cats." But there was another side to him because Kuklinski was fond of women and was said to have been romantic at times. How romantic, how caring is something of a divided issue. The movie portrays him as a loving, doting husband and father, but he already had 2 kids with a much older woman when he met his wife-to-be, Barbara Pedrici. When the film depicts the wonderful early romance, replete with bouquets of flowers and awkward dates, Pedrici would later tell the British press that when she once told him she wasn't ready for a full-on relationship and might want to date others, he jabbed her with the sharp end of a hunting knife. "I felt the blood running down my back," she told the press. Kuklinski then told her in no uncertain terms that she was his forever, and if she left him, she and her entire family were dead. It said he throttled her until she lost consciousness. This is somewhat different from the sweethearts in love we see in the movie. Nonetheless, she would never leave him out of fear or love. Well, that's open to interpretation. They had 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. The family understood that here was a double personality. They even called him the good Richie and the bad Richie. The good version was a hard-working, committed bomber who would do anything for his family. The bad version disappeared for weeks on end. He broke noses and handed out black eyes. He even killed one of his daughter's dogs as a punishment because she came home late. This was a man with an almost inhuman rage, but also a man who could be a wonderful father and husband. Soon he was returning home with large amounts of money, which may have helped ameliorate those fears they all had of him flying into dangerous frenzies of anger. Nonetheless, they had barbecues, visited theme parks, made home videos, a lot of home videos, ate turkey at Thanksgiving. They were an average working middle-class American family. Mom's apple pie and church on Sunday. But then more money was coming in, and that's because Kuklinski had started working for the American mob. Apparently some mob bosses had got the word out that there was a giant Polish-American man in town who showed little or no fear. If you did wrong by him, you lost your teeth or went missing. He was quite the asset for those kinds of people. As the kids were growing up, Kuklinski was taking care of people for the Genovese crime family. He also worked as a human disposal man for Newark's the Cavalcante crime family and the Gambinos of New York City. How did he dispose of people? Well, you name it. He had many methods. He later said in interviews he liked to be creative. One time he bought a crossbow, and because he really wanted to use it, he shot a random guy in the head with it. "I just wanted to see if it would work," he later said in an interview to the consternation of the reporter. He liked to hone his trade, it said, with one author saying murder for riches became sport. The New York police came to believe that the bums were attacking and killing one another, never suspecting that a full-fledged serial killer from Jersey City was coming over to Manhattan's west side for the purpose of killing people, to practice and perfect the craft of murder. We can't talk about every hit he did, as that would be tantamount to writing an encyclopedia, but we can discuss some of his more nefarious actions. Well, they were all dark. He told the media later that he enjoyed disposing of people in different ways. Ice picks, knives, his hands, hammer, but he liked nothing more than using a nasal spray containing cyanide, not hay fever remedies. It did not block people's noses, it undid their existence. This made less mess. You walked them anywhere you wanted, and the cops just thought they had a heart attack victim. When he wasn't leaving bodies in parks or down alleys, he was taking them to a place where he could chop them up and refrigerate the parts. Sometimes, he just freeze the whole body, and then sometime later dump it. This was particularly smart because then the authorities could not determine the time of death, hence the name the Iceman. Although others will tell you he got his name because of his frigid demeanor. There's more ice to this story too. How did Bad Richie know about cyanide? He got this from a man known as Mr. Softy, real name Robert Prong. Prong was ex-military and very familiar with bombs and poisons and guns. He actually drove around in a Mr. Softy ice cream van, hence the nickname. Kuklinski would later recall his friendship with the hitman, saying he'd go around the neighborhoods and sell ice cream to the kids and maybe kill one of their fathers. But after teaching Kuklinski many methods of murder, Mr. Softy ended up being found in his van, shot several times in the head. Another notch for the Iceman. He did this, police suspect, because he was tying up loose ends. The cops at this time were on to him. It's also said, perhaps not true, that Mr. Softy had offered his services to take out Kuklinski's family, if Kuklinski took out his family. Lots of loose ends could be tied up if there were no families left. We are told that things had started to turn awry. For a long time, the Iceman had been in the services of mob boss Roy DeMeo. DeMeo had not only once handed a beating to Kuklinski, with his cronies of course, and humiliated him on several occasions, but there were rumors DeMeo was beginning to lose it, and might end up ratting other mob bosses out. Kuklinski didn't need much encouragement to take his boss out. DeMeo was another victim, or at least this is what police thought. He never actually admitted to that. The movie depicts a couple of instances that are apparently true. One is when DeMeo first met Kuklinski and was impressed at how well he could take a beating. Like a man. We're told Kuklinski was later taken out for a ride in a car, and at some point, the mobster said, "Kill that man over there walking his dog." Kuklinski got out and did it, no problem. Not a big deal. He was hired. But the Polak never had a great relationship with the man, and we might think that he was very happy to get rid of him, if of course he did. Surely he couldn't hide all this killing from his wife. Well, she later said in an interview, "I never questioned him. He would go out at all hours, money would flood in, but she knew better than to be too inquisitive." As for his friends, they all went missing too in the end, except just one, according to the Iceman. "Anyone you killed you liked?" asked an interviewer. "All my friends are dead," was his sardonic reply, hinting that he had killed them. It's a long story, but his friends started to know his business, and that was dangerous. He actually did say that there was only one friend he didn't take out, but the rest were fair game. All these tales of gangs and murders often end. People got paranoid and started removing their fears one by one. The mob were doing it, and Kuklinski was doing it. But the cops weren't far behind. And when one undercover agent got the Iceman to talk about fast and convenient ways to kill someone over the phone and to sign up for another contract, they swooped in. He was arrested in December of 1986 with many charges, including multiple murders and robbery. He was eventually sentenced to 2 life sentences, getting 30 years for killing a cop. It later turned out he had killed another mob boss too. He ended up in prison on the same wing as his brother, Joey. As we said earlier, Joey Kuklinski had gone the wrong way too. He was serving time for assaulting and then strangling to death a 12-year-old girl. He then threw her off a roof along with her pet dog. Did he regret any of the murders? Well, he usually said no. Then, in one interview, he said perhaps one regret was killing a man who had prayed to God in front of him to save his life. In his own words, Kuklinski said, "So I told him he could have half an hour to pray to God, and if God could come down and change the circumstances, he'd have that time. But God never showed up, and he never changed the circumstances, and that was that. It wasn't too nice. That's one thing. I shouldn't have done that one. I shouldn't have done it that way." His daughter, Merrick Kuklinski, later did some interviews with the press, saying the film was not close to reality in terms of their home life. She said she had loved her father, and she was shocked to find out he had killed more than 100 people. Some say close to 200. The large woman, standing almost 6 feet tall, said she has her dad's ashes. She showed the interviewer a card she had sent to her father while she was in prison. "Remember, Daddy, you always left the light on for me. That warm light still shines in my heart," the card reads. "He denied us nothing," she said about her father. "He wanted his life to be like it was on television. He just didn't know how to get there." She said her mother was no angel herself, but her dad could fly into rages, and they knew to stay away when that happened. She said he even told the kids once that if he ended up killing their mother in a rage, then he would have to kill them, too. She said they knew he wasn't kidding, but he also confided in Merritt when she was just a kid. He told her about what happened with his abusive parents, and even told her that he had killed people. He told me about the time he used a wooden clothing rod to beat to death another teenager who had been bullying him, she said. She concluded, saying she had loved him, but later knew he was a sick, demented man who'd been abused and had not come to terms with that. Maybe if he'd gotten treatment, some or all of this could have been prevented. That thought haunts me every day, she said. During those many prison interviews, Kuklinski seems entirely passive, smiling and laughing at some murders. But then there's one time when he eventually looks upset, and that's when, once again, he's asked if he regrets it.
No!
And you almost see a tear, some internal emotional distress. I ain't gonna make this yet. Meaning maybe he can't carry on with the interview, but he does. You see the Iceman crying, not very macho, but I've heard people that mean everything. The only people that meant anything. Richard Kuklinski died at age 70 in a prison hospital. He thought he'd been poisoned, although he'd been diagnosed with Kawasaki disease, an inflammation of blood vessels. He had told doctors that they should revive him when he was out, but that didn't happen. His wife Barbara had already signed a do not resuscitate order. That is some story, a chilling tale, with a message in there along the lines of violence often begets violence. We're now going to ask you what you think. Also, be sure to check out our other show. This is a real-life hitman. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.
So far we've covered perhaps the most well-known serial killer in Jack the Ripper, the most beastly in Ted Bundy, and now we are about to enter the realm of perhaps the weirdest savage ever to hold a place in the serial killer hall of infamy. He was the inspiration behind the Hitchcock classic movie Psycho, as well as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and to some extent, The Silence of the Lambs. There hasn't really been anyone that shocked the world as much as this guy. Just ask the cops that discovered his house of horrors, the ones that didn't succumb to a nervous breakdown anyway. If you haven't heard of him, you're in for it. Welcome to this episode of the Infographic Show, America's strangest serial killer, Ed Gein. First of all, we should say that Mr. Gein was not close to someone like Ted Bundy on the nasty scale, nor was he as brutal as Jack the Ripper or as despicable as H.H. Holmes. If anything, the man was warped beyond comprehension. Also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, Gein was no doubt mentally ill to an unfathomable degree. So, many of you will have heard of the movie Psycho. It's rather old, and most likely older than most of you watching. You might have heard of the series The Bates Motel, which is based on that movie. Well, the main character in the movie was based on Ed Gein, and indeed, Gein was said to have been brought up in an abusive family with a very oppressive and hyper-religious mother. He was born on August 27, 1906, in a place called La Crosse, Wisconsin. According to serial killer websites, Gein had a beleaguered childhood, having to listen to his mother's frantic preaching regarding sin and lust and the inevitable hell they would lead to. It's said his childhood was very isolated and he had few friends. He had a brother who died in an accident when Gein was still young. Some people have conjectured that Gein killed him, but there's no proof. People have ventured that Gein, being the shy and weaker brother, killed his sibling, and this could be compared to the Old Testament thriller Cain and Abel. But let's stick with what we know. One bio tells us, at school he rarely socialized, although we are told his teachers remembered that he had demonstrated queer mannerisms such as laughing randomly. Later in life, his family moved to a farm, and there Gein became even more isolated. His mother may have been strict, but it said Gein was obsessed with her. He adored her. She told him that having relationships with women was a sin, and that all other women besides herself were prostitutes, and dating them essentially meant being in league with Satan himself. This was not a good start for young Ed, especially if you've read Freud on overbearing mothers. Gein's father died, and so it was just him and the zealous mother. But then she had a stroke, and Gein ended up having to look after her. He took odd jobs around town, and was known as a quiet, decent guy who was reliable when you wanted something fixed. Apparently, he was quite a capable handyman. His devotion to his mother was unerring. but it said that Gain had become fascinated with stories about Nazis and cannibals, which he read in various books and death cult magazines. His mother then passed away in 1945, leaving Ed alone on the farm. It said he kept the rooms where she had stayed in the same condition and locked them so they would stay that way forever. He continued working his odd jobs and doing work on the farm, but a few years after his mother's death, Gain took up a new hobby. To some extent, that hobby was trying to become her. Now for the gruesome part.
Okay, you're a faggot. Oh, now you're straight again. Good job. What's up, really?
Shut up.
My mic doesn't work for a second.
I'm muting you.
Why the fuck are you muting me?
As we said, Gain was not a prolific serial killer, but what he did do makes up for the low body count. In 1957, a woman that worked at a local hardware store went missing. Her name was Bernice Warden. Her son told police that one of the last people to be seen in the store with her was none other than the habitual hat-wearing Mr. Gain. He was arrested shortly after, and police received a warrant to check out the Gain farm. This is not one of those serial killer stories with twists and turns, because the cops found what they were looking for immediately upon searching the farm. That was Mrs. Warden's dead body, shot with a .22 caliber rifle, hung upside down in a shed like an animal. The torso had been, what's called in hunting, dressed out, meaning it was opened and the organs had been taken out. The body was also mutilated from head to toe. Captain Lloyd Showposter, who saw this grisly sight, said tendons in the ankles had been cut and a rod had been placed through them. The body was drawn up in the air by a block and tackle, the body was dressed out, and the head was missing. Her head was later found in a burlap sack. Ed had a thing for heads, as you shall see. This was obviously a sickening sight for the deputy that found the body, but inside the house, police got the shock of their lives. As we said, he liked to keep the heads of his victims. Police found 5 heads inside plastic bags, as well as 4 skulls. But more stomach churning, they also found masks, whereby Gain had carefully cut off the faces and kept them intact so he could wear them. One police officer told the press, some of them have lipstick on and look perfectly natural.
Can you stop?
If you knew them, you'd be able to recognize them.
Bro,
In fact, Gain was a handyman for many years, and we are not talking about fixing creaking doors. Police found all sorts of things, and not just humans. Gain had made lampshades, chair covers, and waste
Res
baskets
me!
out of human
I'm
skin.
literally about to
He had human
freaking...
skulls sitting atop bedposts, and in the kitchen we could find bowls made from skulls. A la Psycho, he made a skin
You're getting
fortress that he
freaking
could get
reported,
into
kid.
And thereby be a woman.
Why are you
or more
reporting me?
specifically,
Because you
his
did
mom.
that on
He
purpose.
didn't leave out the bottom half.
Why would I do that on purpose? My mom was telling me something that happened at
Perhaps his piece de resistance in
school
terms
today.
of fashionable items was a belt made from women's nipples. He also had a collection of noses and balls. If Ed wanted, he could become a woman by wearing all of this. But it wasn't all about dressing up.
First of all, you're on break. I know you are because this week was Thanksgiving.
Website, Gain would wear a death mask and the skin clothes and then go and dance around in the garden with his costume on.
Kid.
We cannot
I'm literally about to
confirm this,
report you.
It doesn't really matter because
Why
Gain
would you
admitted
report
he
me?
liked to wear the suit to become his mother, so just the thought of him watching
What
TV
did I
in
do?
his face
Am I
mask and
hacking?
skin suit is horrifying.
No,
enough.
you're being...
Oh,
Gain didn't kill people for all of his handiwork. He told police that much of his raw material was gathered by robbing local graves. He did, however, admit to at least one more murder, and he was suspected of having killed more women. A famous quote of Gain was this: "When I see a pretty girl walking down the street, I think 2 things. One part
Give me my
wants to be
guns
real
back
nice and
right
sweet,
now.
and the other part wonders what
Because
her
I died
ass looks
because
like
of
on a
you.
stick."
No,
Well,
give me my purple
some
tack
websites,
right now.
and even the movie
You didn't die
American
because of me,
Psycho
bro.
attributes
Yes, I
it to
did.
But other websites
No,
tell
you
us there was
you
another
didn't even
serial
res
killer
me.
named Ed
You
Kemper
didn't
that
res
said it.
me.
The strangeness
I
was
just
the
read
first
you. That's how
purple
you're
tack
alive.
on Plainfield,
You're
which would
alive,
never
look.
be playing
Right
again.
here.
You
Many people
rebooted
say the
me
sheriff
after
of the town
freaking
died
picking
fairly
me
young
up,
as a result
trying
of
to
the
throw
trauma
me so
that
you
Yeah,
wouldn't be able
in
rebooting.
this
to.
case. In fact,
I
one of
rebooted
the
you because
back.
he was a victim
my
of
guns
Ed
back or you're getting
Gein as surely
reported.
as
Your
if he
guns
had
are right
tortured him.
here.
Gain was unsurprisingly found by the courts to
Give
be
me my
insane.
purple
He was
tack.
diagnosed with schizophrenia and a severe
I don't
Oedipus
have a purple
complex.
tag.
Yes, you
In
do.
1984 from lung cancer in Mendoza
Bro,
Mental Health
you want to see my
Institute. It's thought
inventory?
he
Look, I
I
don't have a
saw
purple
you
tag.
pick it up.
mental institution.
Right here.
and
Bro,
let
Give me it.
I-
Give me
that's-
it. Give me it right now.
I don't
Some of
have.
them are a
You're
little
getting.
crazy.
If you don't do it, you're getting reported.
Yes, I'll call you
And
later.
first of all, I have video footage of this because I'm streaming, kid.
The question we will leave you with today is this: Are we
So how about
correct
you
in
give me my
saying this
freaking
is the
purple
world's
tag,
strangest
or you're
serial
I don't
killer?
have
Let us know
it.
your
I don't
thoughts in the
have a
comments.
purple tag.
Yes, you do.
This is the same thing. Look, you're fine. I'll take your blue AR then. Actually, you can have it. I don't want it.
Give me my freaking purple tag, because I saw you drop it and then pick it back up. Yes, he does. It's right freaking there. Dude, I have
Just because it has a purple skin on doesn't mean it's a purple tag.
Dude, I have footage of you picking it up. Don't try me, kid.
Oh, really? Did you clip it?
No, I'm streaming.
Pick up this one.
I'm streaming.
Streaming?
Yes, I can
Cool,
literally.
bro. How many views do you have?
Give me the freaking purple tag.
How many views you got, bro?
Give me my purple tag.
I'll give it to you. He says please.
Please.
There you go.
Stop.
Master now. Free on the App Store and Google Play.
Dude, just go get that tag, okay? How much would bet I'll get you a purple tag? From this pond. Oh wait, I need a fishing gear.
It's late at night, and you and your girlfriend are driving down
thank
a
you for the
lonely
$1
country road
dono.
somewhere in the heart of Texas. Your girlfriend points out how clear
Alright, yeah,
the night
no, you can have your
skies are all
purple
the way
tag
out here, and she asks you to pull the car over so you can have a romantic moment under the stars. You point out
You can
that
have
you're in the middle of nowhere.
Oh,
Maybe
big
it's
shot
not
at!
so smart to stop, but she's insistent. So grudgingly, you pull the car over. Gazing at the Milky Way laid out before you, you have to admit, she's right. It really is beautiful out here.
Dude, you're so good that you're not
You
helping
think you
me.
hear the sound of a twig.
I was getting shot at.
Look around, but your
And
girlfriend
thanks
is
to
Yeah,
you,
you know what? Guess what?
I
So
didn't
am
have
I.
a shotgun.
twig snap just at the edge of your headlight. This time, you know
You're getting reported, kid.
worriedly,
And I hope you get banned.
I literally marked the
I
tag
literally
for you.
hope you get banned for that.
like a clock, bending over to pick
Because
up
you freaking did that on
report me and
purpose,
ban
kid.
me?
raising chains down. And from
I hope you get banned.
legendary human skin
My
wearing
dad works for
Leatherface.
Epic Games.
Hello,
I don't give a
welcome to
frick if he
another episode
does.
Of the infographic show.
Okay,
Today
well
we're
then,
putting
I'm
you,
just gonna tell him
Average Joe,
You're
up
just
against
Hey
saying
dad,
that.
there's this kid named Kingdom underscore Sub-Zero. Yeah,
Originally from Texas,
there's
where he lives
fucking
with his
like
family who
there's
cook the
shit
people he
stuff.
kills and make them into chili and other foods to be sold at his father's gas station. With his iconic weapons, the chainsaw
You're so
Leatherface
bad!
uses everything from his bare fists to sledgehammers to kill his victims.
Alright,
Or
yo,
he
let's
might
go
just
play with you.
incapacitate them and hang them up on meat hooks so he can skin them alive. As a skin
Oh, by the way,
Leatherface has a
that wasn't a
fixation on
purple
making
tag, that was a
clothes
gold
out of
one.
his victim's skin, much like real serial killer
I got
Ed Gein,
this.
whom it's thought that Leatherface was based off of. Whatever the inspiration, Leatherface will famously fashion his victim's skin into a mask to wear, though the exact reasoning for this is unknown. Given the fact that Leatherface is likely either autistic or mentally retarded, he may not even be aware of the horror he inflicts or the inappropriateness of wearing other
Like
people's
you.
faces as masks. Leatherface is the first opponent we featured, which does not have any sort of superhuman or supernatural abilities. Terrifying as he may be, Leatherface is a normal person.
Why
Albeit
are you
quite a bit
watching
bigger
some
than most
guy
people.
fucking
Standing over
get-
6 feet 5 inches in height, facing off against Leatherface, pardon the pun, means you're going to be going up against an individual who has no increased abilities or power, perhaps giving you the best fighting chance of any opponent
That's
we've
fine. Did you
featured
make the
thus far in
markers?
U-Versus. However, you're going to have to watch out for the fact that Leatherface is also quite strong, able to lift an adult person 2 to 3 feet in the air and onto a meat hook. And that takes some serious upper body strength, so
have you
you're
gotten this
probably
on?
not going to want to get into a punching match. Leatherface also has some resistance to pain, and this may be physiological, such as the inability to feel pain for people who suffer from anhidrosis. Seeing as Leatherface does react to pain, however, it's likely that he's simply psychologically better able to handle extreme amounts of pain compared to the normal person. As our first opponent who doesn't feature any supernatural, superhuman, or other types of powers, we thought it would be only fair for you to fight on a level playing field. That means no access to high-powered weapons, military tech, or any of the explosive goodness we're so fond of here at the Infographic Show. Instead, we're putting you in the shoes of his recent victim, and we'll show you how to survive and defeat Texas's most legendary serial killer. You wake up hanging on a meat hook. The pain is severe, but thanks to the shock, you're not in complete agony. Also, the meat hook hasn't penetrated all the way through your body. Instead, it's pierced through the back muscles just under your shoulder. So bleeding out isn't an immediate threat. Looking across me, though, is your unfortunate girlfriend. Seeing as her face is already gone, it's clearly too late for her. Oh well, you warned her it was a dumb idea to stop and stare at the stars. First things first, you're going to have to grab onto the chain above your head and lift yourself off the meat hook. No doubt an extremely painful experience, but you're up against Leatherface, so you better get used to pain. Once you hop off the hook, there's a bit of good news. If you haven't already bled to death, that means that the hook didn't pierce anything too vital. But there's a bit of good news. If
You've had it already. The way through your body. Instead, it appears through the back muscles just under your shoulder. It doesn't, but there's no people for all the things. We told police that much of his seems to become his mother, so just the thought of the woman indoors. Police perfectly natural. They also found men shot her alive. Heads were later found in a burlap. Leave out the bottom half from salt. Share covered up and the plastic bag as well. But inside the house, heads were later found in a captain.